The Galactic Council had ruled the known stars for 12,000 years, and in all that time they had never once been surprised by a new species. They had seen it all before. The aggressive insectoids who thought numbers meant victory until the Council's fleet reduced their hive worlds to ash. The peaceful telepaths who tried to influence Council decisions until their minds were scattered across 1,000 prison moons. The machine intelligences who calculated they could win a war until they learned the Council had been fighting wars since before their first circuit was printed. Every species followed a pattern, and the Council had learned to read that pattern within moments of first contact. So when humanity's first warp signature flickered across their long-range sensors 17 cycles ago, the Council dispatched a preliminary assessment team without much interest. Standard protocol demanded classification. The team spent 3 orbital cycles observing Earth from behind. Their cloaking fields and what they saw confirmed every assumption. Humans were a fractured species, divided into hundreds of competing nations that could not agree on anything. They polluted their own atmosphere and poisoned their own waters. They waged wars against each other over invisible lines drawn on maps and ideas that existed only in their minds. Their technology was primitive by galactic standards, with chemical rockets still pushing them into their own orbital space and nuclear weapons they had somehow managed not to use on themselves for several decades. The assessment team classified humanity as a Class 2 species, which meant technologically adolescent and socially fractured and biologically unremarkable. The report noted with some amusement that humans maintained standing military forces even during what they called peacetime. The Council archived the report and forgot about the small blue world at the edge of the galaxy's western spiral arm. That was there. First mistake. The Dominion of Yarth had been a problem for the Council for nearly a century. Once a loyal member species, the Eurethians had grown ambitious under their new Supreme Commander and begun expanding beyond their sanctioned borders. The Council issued warnings. The Eurethians ignored them. The Council imposed sanctions. The Eurethians found other trading partners. The Council threatened military action. The Eurethians calculated that the Council was too slow and too bureaucratic to actually follow through. They were right about the bureaucracy, but they would soon learn they were wrong about everything else. When Eurethian scouts discovered Earth's remote system, they saw opportunity. The planet was resource-rich and positioned perfectly as a staging ground for further expansion into unclaimed space. Better still, the native species was classified as Class 2, which meant they would offer no meaningful resistance. The Supreme Commander authorized the invasion personally and dispatched 3 full fleets to claim humanity's homeworld for the Dominion. 40,000 Eurethian soldiers made planetfall on a large island continent the humans called Australia. The Eurethians chose this location because it was isolated from the major human population centers and would allow them to establish a foothold before the primitive natives even knew they had arrived. The landing was textbook perfect. Dropships touched down in the red desert interior and soldiers poured out to secure the perimeter. Heavy armor units rolled off transport carriers and took up defensive positions. Air superiority fighters launched from mobile platforms and began mapping the terrain. Within 6 hours, the Eurethians had established a forward operating base capable of supporting their entire invasion force. The Supreme Commander received the initial reports with satisfaction. Everything was proceeding according to plan. The human military had detected the landing, of course, but their response was confused and uncoordinated, just as the assessment team had predicted. Primitive aircraft circled at a distance too, afraid to engage ground vehicles gathered at the edges of sensor range, but did not advance. The humans were clearly terrified, and the Eurethians settled in to wait for their inevitable surrender. That was 6 standard cycles ago, High Counselor. Vathran had not thought about humanity or the Eurethian invasion since it began. He had more pressing matters to attend to including a trade dispute between the Calorians and the Synthri that threatened to destabilize an entire sector. The invasion of a Class II world was beneath his notice, so when his communication array chimed with a priority signal from the edge of human space, he almost ignored it. But something made him accept the transmission. Perhaps it was the signal's origin point, which was broadcasting from a Yarethian emergency frequency that should not have been active. Perhaps it was the metadata that indicated the signal came from a single escape pod rather than a fleet vessel. Perhaps it was simply fate. The face that appeared on his display was Yarethian, but Vathrin barely recognized it as such. The species was known for their proud bearing and their gleaming dark carapaces that they polished to a mirror shine before battle. This Yarethian was broken. His carapace had faded to the pale gray that indicated extreme psychological trauma, and his compound eyes darted frantically, as if searching for threats in the shadows of his own pod. "This is High Counselor Vathrin of the Galactic Council," Vathrin said carefully. "Identify yourself and state your situation." The Yarethian's mandibles clicked together several times before he could form words. "I am Field Commander Kesseth of the Dominion's Third Fleet," the creature said in a voice that trembled. "I am the sole survivor of the Earth expedition." Vathrin felt something cold settle in his chest. "Sole survivor," he repeated. "There were 40,000 soldiers in that invasion force." "Yes," Kesseth whispered. "There were. What happened?" To them, Kesseth's eyes finally focused on the screen, and Vathrin saw something in them he had never expected to see in a Yarethian warrior. He saw fear. Not the fear of death which all soldiers learn to master. Not the fear of failure which drove them to fight harder. This was something deeper and more primal. This was the fear of prey. "They came for us," Kesseth said. "In the dark they came, and they did not stop until every last one of us was dead or fled." "Who came for you?" Vathrin demanded. "Did the humans have allies we were not aware of?" Kesseth laughed, and the sound was wrong and hollow and terrible. "No allies," he said. "Just humans." He leaned closer to the screen, and his voice dropped to a whisper. "Just 12 of them." The transmission ended, and High Counselor Vathrin sat in silence for a very long time. Then he reached for his console and began composing an emergency summons to the full council. The message was simple. They had made a mistake about humanity, and now they needed to find out exactly how big that mistake was. The council chamber had not seen a full emergency session in over 300 years. The last time all 17 elder species had gathered in the same room was during the machine war, when rogue artificial intelligences threatened to consume entire sectors of civilized space. That crisis had taken 11 years to resolve and cost billions of lives. This session would reveal something far more unsettling. Field Commander Kesseth stood in the center of the chamber, surrounded by the curved benches where the council representatives sat in judgment. He was not bound in chains, despite what protocol demanded for enemy combatants. The chains had been removed because Kesseth could not stop shaking violently enough to walk, and 2 medical attendants had to support him on either side. Just to keep him upright, his carapace had grown even paler during the journey to the council homeworld, and patches of it had begun to flake away like dead skin. The Yarethian physicians who examined him said he was dying, not from any wound or disease, but from something they had never encountered before. His body was simply giving up, as if living had become too terrible to continue. High Counselor Vathrin looked down at the broken warrior and felt the first stirring of genuine unease. "Field Commander Kesseth," he said in his most formal tone, "you have been brought before this council to provide testimony regarding the Yarethian invasion of the planet designated Earth. You will tell us everything that happened from the moment of landing to your escape. Do you understand?" Kesseth's mandibles clicked weakly. I understand, he said. But I do not think you will believe me. Let us be the judge of that. Kesseth was silent for a long moment, and when he spoke his voice was distant, like a man describing a nightmare he could not wake from. The landing was perfect. He began. We touched down in the interior of the southern continent, in a region the humans call the Outback. It was chosen because it was remote and sparsely populated, and would give us time to establish our position before the human military could respond. Continue, Vathran said. We had 40,000 soldiers. Kesseth said, heavy armor, air support, artillery capable of leveling cities. We built a forward operating base in less than 6 hours, and our sensors showed no human military presence within 200 kilometers. He paused and his eyes went unfocused. We thought we were safe. Councillor Murthax of the Calorian delegation leaned forward with interest. The Calorians were a warrior species themselves, and they understood military matters better than most council members. What changed? Murthax asked. The third night, Kesseth said. On the third night, our perimeter sensors detected a single heat signature approaching from the east. Just one. Command assumed it was local wildlife, because the continent was full of strange and dangerous creatures. He laughed again with that hollow, broken sound. We were half right. It was dangerous. What was it? Vathran asked. A human, Kesseth said. A single human wearing what we later learned was called combat armor and carrying weapons that looked primitive compared to our own. One human triggered your perimeter alarm, Murthax said with disbelief. And your forces did not respond. We responded, Kesseth said. We sent a squad of 10 soldiers to investigate and eliminate the threat. And they never reported back. The chamber grew very quiet. We sent another squad, Kesseth continued. 20 soldiers this time with heavy weapons and night vision equipment. They reached the position where the first squad had disappeared and found nothing. No bodies, no blood, no sign of combat at all. Just empty armor lying in the sand. Empty armor, Councillor Veleth of the Centauri repeated. What do you mean empty? I mean the soldiers were gone, Kesseth said. Their armor remained, but the bodies inside had vanished. We never found them. He shuddered so violently that the medical attendants had to tighten their grip to keep him standing. Then the lights went out. Kesseth described what happened next in halting. Fragmented sentences as if speaking. The words aloud caused him physical pain, the base's power. Generators had failed simultaneously, despite being distributed across multiple locations with independent. Fuel supplies emergency lighting had flickered. On and then died communications had gone silent as jammers of unknown origin blocked every frequency, and then the screaming had begun. It started at the eastern barracks, Kesseth said. We heard weapons fire and shouting, and then nothing. Then it moved to the armory, then the command center. Then the vehicle depot. You are saying a single human attacked your entire base, Murthax demanded. No, Kesseth said. I am saying a single human moved through our entire base like a ghost. We had 40,000 soldiers with weapons and armor and training, and none of it mattered. We could not see him. We could not track him. We could not stop him. That is impossible. Murthax said. Kesseth turned to face the Calorian directly, and something flickered in his dead eyes. By morning he had killed 3,000 of us, Kesseth said. 3,000 soldiers in one night. And do you know what the worst part was? No one answered. He was laughing, Kesseth whispered. The whole time he moved through our base, killing everyone he found, he was laughing. Like it was fun for him, like we were nothing but toys. The chamber erupted in murmurs, and Vathran had to strike his staff against the floor 3 times to restore order. You said 12 humans were responsible for the destruction of your forces, Vathran said. You have described only one. Kesseth nodded slowly. The first night was just one, he said. We think he was a scout, what humans call a reconnaissance element. He was testing our defenses and finding them wanting. And the others, they came on the fourth night. Kesseth said, 11 more. We know because they announced themselves. Announced themselves? Vathran repeated. Over our own communication system, Kesseth said. They had cracked our encryption and hijacked our frequencies, and one of them broadcast a message to every soldier in the base. What did the message say? Kesseth closed his eyes, and when he spoke again, his voice was different, as if he was reciting words that had been burned into his memory. Attention, Eurethian forces, he said. This is Sergeant Major Williams of the Australian Special Air Service Regiment. You have invaded sovereign human territory and killed human citizens. That was a mistake. You have 1 hour to surrender. After that, we are coming in, and we will not be taking prisoners. This is your only warning. And your forces did not surrender. Murthax asked Kesseth, opened his eyes. Some wanted to, he said. But Supreme Commander Vethrak refused. He said we still had overwhelming numbers and superior firepower, and that these humans were just trying to frighten you into submission. What happened after the hour ended? Kesseth was silent for a long time. Hell, he finally said. Hell happened. He described 5 cycles of constant warfare as the 12 humans systematically dismantled the Eurethian invasion force. They struck without warning from impossible angles and vanished before counterattacks could be organized. They turned the Eurethians' own weapons against them and booby-trapped supply depots and assassinated officers. In their own command bunkers, they fought in daylight and darkness and seemed to need no rest and no resupply, and through it all, they kept laughing. On the final day, there were only a few 100 of us left, Kesseth said. We had retreated to the last defensible position, and we knew we were going to die. And then one of them walked right into our camp in broad daylight. Walked in, Vathran said. Through your defenses. He did not seem to notice our defenses, Kesseth said. He walked up to Supreme Commander Vethrak and looked him in the eye and said something I will never forget. What did he say? Kesseth met the High Counselor's gaze. He said, You picked the wrong planet, mate, and then he smiled. And then the Supreme Commander's head was no longer attached to his body, and then there was nothing but fire and death. And I ran. His voice cracked. I ran and I hid, and I found an escape pod, and I fled into space like a coward, and I'm the only one left. 40,000 soldiers, and I am all that remains. He collapsed then, and the medical attendants caught him and carried him away. The council sat in stunned silence. Finally, Councillor Murthax spoke. We need to see the combat footage, he said. If any survived, it did, Vathran said quietly. And I think you should all prepare yourselves for what you are about to witness. He was right. They were not prepared at all. The combat footage was fragmented and corrupted, and barely watchable, but it was enough. It was more than enough. The Council's technical specialists had extracted every recoverable file from Field Commander Kesseth's escape pod and pieced together what they could from damaged data cores and scrambled transmissions. What they assembled was a nightmare in motion. The first clip showed the Eurethian base from an aerial drone's perspective. Just before sunset on the third night, everything looked normal, with soldiers moving between prefabricated structures and vehicles, patrolling the perimeter, and the organized chaos of a military operation proceeding according to plan. Then the lights went out, and the drone's thermal imaging activated. And the council watched a single red heat signature move through the base like a knife through water. The figure never stopped moving and never hesitated, and seemed to know exactly where every soldier would be before they knew themselves counselor. Velith of the Synthery turned away from the display after the figure killed its 20th target in as many seconds. How is this possible? She whispered. No biological organism can move that fast. The humans can apparently. Councillor Murthax replied without taking his eyes from the screen. The second clip was worse. It showed a Eurethian heavy armor unit attempting to engage one of the 12 Marines in an open desert clearing. The tank's targeting systems locked onto the human, and its main cannon fired a plasma bolt capable of vaporizing a small building. The human was not there when the bolt arrived. He had moved. In the fraction of a second between the cannon's firing and the projectile's arrival, and now he was on top of the tank, and something was happening to the crew hatch that the camera could not quite capture. 3 seconds later, the tank exploded. From the inside, the third clip had audio. It showed a group of Eurethian soldiers huddled in a bunker, listening to their communications. Equipment crackled with static. Then a voice came through clear as crystal and speaking perfect Eurethian, which should have been impossible since humans had only encountered the Eurethian language 6 cycles ago. Knock knock. The voice said, "Who is there?" One of the soldiers replied automatically, "Democracy." Democracy who? Democracy is non-negotiable, mate, and neither is the arse-kicking you lot are about to receive. The bunker's door blew inward a moment later, and the footage dissolved into static. High Counselor Vathrin stopped the playback and turned to face his fellow council members. Their expressions ranged from disbelief to horror to something that looked uncomfortably like awe. Our analysts have reviewed all recovered footage and cross-referenced it with Field Commander Kesseth's testimony. Vathrin said, "They have compiled a preliminary report on the humans' capabilities." He activated a data display, and numbers began scrolling across the screen. The Eurethian invasion force consisted of 40,000 combat personnel equipped with standard Dominion military hardware, including heavy armor, air support, and artillery. He paused. The human response force consisted of 12 individuals belonging to an organization called the Special Air Service Regiment. 12. Counselor Murthax repeated, "You are certain?" "We have identified 12 distinct human combatants in the recovered footage." Vathrin confirmed, "No more and no less. And these 12 individuals defeated 40,000 Eurethian soldiers. They did more than defeat them," Vathrin said. "They annihilated them. Our analysts estimate total Eurethian casualties at 39,997. The remaining 3 either fled like Field Commander Kesseth or are listed as missing and presumed dead." The numbers hung in the air like an accusation. Counselor Murthax pulled out his personal computing device and began entering calculations with trembling claws. "That would mean," he said slowly, "that each human combatant was responsible for approximately 3,300 enemy casualties." "Correct. In 6 standard cycles." "Correct. Against a technologically superior force with air support and heavy armor." "Correct." Murthax set down his device and stared at the blank screen for a long moment. "That is not a kill ratio," he said finally. "That is an extinction event." Vathrin nodded. "Which brings us to the matter at hand," he said. "The Eurethian invasion has failed completely. Their forces have been eliminated, and their staging ground has been denied. But more importantly, we now have a problem. The humans." Counselor Vela said, "The humans," Vathrin agreed. "We classified them as a Class 2 species based on our initial assessment. Technologically adolescent and socially fractured and biologically unremarkable." He pulled up the original assessment report and let it hang on the display next to the combat footage. That assessment was wrong. Clearly, Murthax said. The question now is what classification they actually deserve. The council chamber fell silent as 17 species considered the implications. The classification system had been developed over thousands of years and refined through countless first contacts and military engagements. Class 1 species were primitive cultures with no space travel capability. Class 2 species had achieved basic space travel, but posed no threat to established powers. Class 3 species had developed advanced technology and could be considered minor military concerns. Class 4 species were regional powers capable of threatening multiple systems. Class 5 species were major powers that required diplomatic consideration and careful management. There had only ever been one Class 6 species, and that was the Council itself, representing the combined might of 17 civilizations working in concert, based on the evidence presented. Councillor Velith said carefully, "I would suggest classifying humanity as Class 4 at minimum. They have demonstrated combat capabilities that exceed anything we have seen from a single species force. Class 4 is insufficient." Murthax disagreed. Their kill ratio suggests tactical and strategic capabilities beyond anything in our military databases. I would argue for Class 5. Class 5 would make them our equals. Another counselor objected. They have 1 planet and 12 soldiers. How can they be our equals? They had 12 soldiers, Murthax corrected. We do not know how many more they have. We do not know what their full military strength looks like. All we know is that 12 of them destroyed an invasion force that should have conquered their world in a matter of days. Then we need more information. Vathran said, "Before we can assign a proper classification, we need to understand what we are dealing with." He activated another display showing the final transmission recovered from the Eurethian command structure. It was a desperate plea. Broadcast to their homeworld in the invasion's final hours, the Eurethian Supreme Commander's voice was ragged with exhaustion and fear, and something that sounded almost like respect. "Command, this is Supreme Commander Vethrak, requesting immediate reinforcement or extraction." The recording said, "Our forces have been decimated by human resistance. Repeat, our forces have been decimated. We are down to less than 500 combat effective, and we have no answer for their tactics." There was a pause filled with weapons, fire, and distant screaming. "Before I die, I need to know one thing." Vethrak continued, "Our intelligence said they were a Class 2 species. Our intelligence said they would not fight back. Our intelligence said we would win." Another pause, and then a question that would haunt the Council for years to come. "What is the kill ratio for one Earth Marine?" The recording ended. Vathran turned off the display and faced his fellow Council members. "We need to answer that question," he said, "and we need to do it before the humans decide to ask us some questions of their own. What do you propose?" Velith asked. Vathran took a deep breath. "I propose we do something we have not done in 3,000 years, he said. "I propose we send a diplomatic mission to a species we have wronged and hope they are willing to talk instead of fight. And if they are not willing?" Vathran looked at the frozen image on the display, showing a human figure standing amid the wreckage of a Eurethian armored column with an expression of absolute calm on his face. "Then we had better start praying to whatever gods we believe in," he said, "because nothing in our arsenal will save us." The Council voted unanimously to approve the diplomatic mission. None of them slept well that night. Ambassador Keleth of the Synthary had spent 300 years perfecting the art of diplomacy. He had negotiated peace treaties between species that had been at war for millennia. He had convinced genocidal empires to spare their enemies in exchange for trade concessions. He had talked rogue artificial intelligences into peaceful shutdown rather than system-wide destruction. He was considered the finest diplomatic mind in the galaxy, and when the Council asked him to lead the first official delegation to Earth, he accepted without hesitation. Now standing in the observation deck of his diplomatic vessel, watching the blue and white marble of humanity's homeworld grow larger in the viewport, he was beginning to question that decision. "Ambassador," his aide Verith said nervously, "our sensors are detecting something unusual in orbit." "Define unusual," Keleth said without taking his eyes from the planet. "We are reading approximately 300 weapons platforms in stable orbital positions around the planet." Keleth finally turned to look at his aide. 300. He repeated. The original survey showed no orbital infrastructure at all. That survey was conducted 17 cycles ago, Ambassador. And in 17 cycles, they built 300 weapons platforms. Yes, Ambassador. Keleth returned his gaze to the viewport and studied the planet more carefully. Now that he knew what to look for, he could see them scattered across the orbital sphere, like glittering diamonds against the black of space. Each platform was bristling with what his tactical officer had identified as a combination of kinetic weapons and directed energy arrays, and something else that the sensors could not identify at all. What are those unknown signatures? Keleth asked. We do not know, Ambassador, his tactical officer replied, but the energy readings suggest they are weapons of some kind, and they are considerably more powerful than anything in our arsenal. More powerful than Council weapons. By a significant margin, yes. Keleth absorbed this information with the calm expression he had cultivated over centuries of diplomatic service. Inside, however, he felt the first cold tendrils of genuine fear. They built all of this since the invasion. He said quietly, in 6 standard cycles they went from no orbital presence to a defensive network that outclasses the Council's combined fleet. It appears the invasion motivated them, Ambassador. Motivated them, Keleth repeated. That is one way to put it. He turned to his communications officer. Open a channel to the planet and request landing clearance according to standard diplomatic protocols. The officer complied, and a moment later a human voice filled the bridge. Unidentified. Vessel, this is Earth Orbital Defense Command. You have entered restricted space. State your identity and intentions, or you will be fired upon. The voice was calm and professional, but Keleth detected an undercurrent of something else beneath the words, eagerness, perhaps, or anticipation. Earth Orbital Defense Command. This is Ambassador Keleth of the Galactic Council aboard the diplomatic vessel Harmonious Purpose. We are here on a mission of peace to establish formal relations with the human government. We request landing clearance at your earliest convenience. There was a pause, and then the voice returned, sounding slightly different. Council Vessel Harmonious Purpose, you are cleared to land at the following coordinates. A diplomatic escort will meet you on the ground. Welcome to Earth, Ambassador. Another pause, and then a final addition that made Keleth's 3 hearts skip a beat. Try not to do anything stupid. The channel closed and Keleth stood in silence for a long moment before turning to his pilot. Take us down, he said, slowly and with no sudden movements. Yes, Ambassador. The descent through Earth's atmosphere was the longest journey of Keleth's life. The landing site was a sprawling complex of buildings that the humans called the Pentagon, and it was surrounded by a security presence that made Keleth's own diplomatic guards look like children playing dress-up. Human soldiers stood at every corner and checkpoint with weapons that looked primitive, but which Keleth now knew were anything. But they watched the Synthery delegation with expressions that were not hostile exactly, but were far from welcoming. Keleth emerged from his vessel with his hands visible and his posture deliberately non-threatening. He was immediately approached by a human female wearing formal attire that his cultural database identified as a business suit. Ambassador Keleth, she said with a smile that did not reach her eyes. Welcome to Earth. I am Secretary Morrison, and I will be your liaison during your visit. Thank you, Secretary Morrison. Keleth replied. We are honored by your hospitality. Of course you are. She said, please follow me. The Secretary General is ready to receive you. She turned and began walking toward the main building, and Keleth fell into step beside her. As they walked, he noticed human soldiers watching from every window and doorway and rooftop. Their expressions were not hostile. They were amused. Secretary Morrison, Keleth said carefully, I could not help but notice your impressive orbital defense network. It was not present in our initial survey of your system. No, it was not. She agreed. We built it after your friends dropped 40,000 soldiers on our continent. The Eurethians are not our friends, Secretary. They acted without council approval and have been formally censured for their aggression. Censured, Morrison repeated. How nice for them. I assure you the Council takes this matter very seriously. Morrison stopped walking and turned to face him directly. Ambassador, let me be clear about something. She said, we do not care about your council or your censures or your formal diplomatic protocols. 6 cycles ago, an alien army invaded our planet and killed our people, and we had to clean up the mess ourselves. She gestured at the soldiers around them. These men and women and their colleagues in the Australian SAS spent 6 cycles hunting those invaders across the outback. They did it without help from your council and without fancy alien technology and without any expectation that anyone would come to answer for what happened. We are here now. Kelleth offered. Yes, you are, Morrison said. And we have been expecting you. You knew we would come. Of course we knew. After what happened to the Eurethians, we figured the landlords would want to have a chat. She resumed walking, and Kelleth followed. The Secretary General is a reasonable man. Morrison continued. He's willing to discuss terms for formal relations between Earth and your council. But I want you to understand something before you go in there. What is that secretary? She stopped again at the entrance to the main building and looked up at him with an expression that was somehow both friendly and terrifying. We are not afraid of you, she said. We are not afraid of your council, and we are not afraid of any species in your little galactic club. We were minding our own business on our own planet when your Eurethian friends decided to start a fight. She smiled. We finished that fight in 6 cycles with 12 soldiers. Imagine what we could do if we actually tried. She pushed open the door and gestured for him to enter. The Secretary General is waiting. Try not to keep him waiting too long. Kelleth entered the building and was led through a maze of corridors and security checkpoints until he reached a large conference room with a circular table at its center. A human male sat at the head of the table, flanked by advisors in military and civilian dress. He was older than Morrison, with gray hair and weathered features and eyes that had seen more than Kelleth wanted to imagine. Ambassador Kelleth. The man said, rising to offer his hand. I am Secretary General Chun. Please sit. Kelleth took the offered hand and felt the strength in the human's grip. It was not threatening exactly, but it was a reminder that humans were not the soft, fragile creatures the Council had assumed them to be. Thank you, Secretary General. Kelleth said, taking his seat. I am here on behalf of the Galactic Council to formally apologize for the Eurethian invasion and to discuss terms for peaceful relations between our peoples. Apologize, Chen repeated. That is a start, but I think we both know an apology is not why you are really here. I do not understand. Chen leaned forward, and his advisors leaned with him, and suddenly the room felt very small. You are here because you finally watched the footage, Chun said. You are here because you ran the numbers and they did not make sense. You are here because 12 of my soldiers killed 40,000 of theirs, and you want to know how, and you want to know why, and most importantly, you want to know if we are going to do the same thing to you. He smiled, and it was the same smile Morrison had worn outside, friendly and terrifying all at once. So let me answer your questions, Ambassador. The how is classified. The why is because they invaded our home. And whether we do the same thing to you depends entirely on what happens in this room today. He gestured at the table. So let us talk terms. Kelleth swallowed hard and began to negotiate. It was going to be a very long day. The negotiations lasted 7 standard cycles, and they were unlike anything Ambassador Kelleth had ever experienced in 3 centuries of diplomatic service. He had expected the humans to be angry, and they were. He had expected them to be suspicious, and they were. He had expected them to make demands that would be difficult to meet, and they did. What he had not expected was their absolute, unshakable confidence. The humans did not negotiate like a species that had just been invaded. They did not negotiate like a species that was outgunned and outnumbered by the combined might of 17 elder civilizations. They negotiated like a species that had already won and was simply deciding how much to take. Secretary General Chun laid out. humanity's terms on the first day with the calm certainty of a man who had absolutely nothing to prove. 3 things, he said, holding up his fingers. First, we want full membership in your Galactic Council with voting rights equal to any other member species. Keleth nodded carefully. That is unusual for a newly contacted species, but not impossible. I will need to consult with the Council, but I believe it can be arranged. Good. Second, we want recognition of Earth's sovereign space extending 15 light years in all directions. No ships, military or otherwise, enter that space without our permission. 15 light years is a significant claim. Keleth said, there may be resistance from species whose trade routes pass through that region. They can find new routes, Chun said. Or they can explain to their citizens why they thought it was a good idea to argue with us. Keleth made a note on his datapad and moved on, and the third demand. Chen's expression did not change, but something in his eyes went cold. We want a formal apology from the Dominion of Yorith, he said, delivered in person by their supreme commander or his successor, on our soil, on their knees. Ambassador, one of Keleth's aides whispered urgently. That is an extraordinary demand. The Yorithians will never agree to such humiliation. Keleth silenced him with a gesture and studied Chun's face. The human was not bluffing. He was not posturing. He was stating a fact, and if the Dominion refuses... Keleth asked carefully. Chun smiled that same friendly, terrifying smile. Then we will visit them, he said, in person. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. You would attack the Yorithian homeworld, Keleth said. Attack is such a strong word, Ambassador. We prefer the term corrective action. And yes, if the Yorithians refuse to apologize for invading our planet and killing our people, we will be forced to remind them why that was a mistake. He leaned back in his chair. We will not need 40,000 soldiers to do it. We probably will not even need 12. Keleth stared at the human for a long moment. You are serious, he said finally, completely. The Yorithian homeworld is defended by the most powerful military force outside the Council itself. They have orbital defense platforms and planetary shields and a standing army of billions. And we have Marines. Chun said, I know which one I would bet on. He stood and his advisors stood with him. Take our terms to your Council, Ambassador. Tell them we are willing to be reasonable. Tell them we want peace and prosperity and all the good things that come with being part of a galactic community. He walked to the door and paused with his hand on the frame. But also tell them what happens if they refuse. Tell them what happened to the Yorithians in Australia. And tell them that was us being gentle. He smiled one last time. We can be much less gentle if we have to. The door closed behind him, and Keleth sat in silence for a very long time. That night he composed his report to the Council. He wrote about humanity's demands and their capabilities and their absolute refusal to be intimidated. He wrote about the orbital defense network that had sprung up around Earth in a matter of cycles, and the weapons technology that exceeded anything in the Council's arsenal. He wrote about the way human soldiers had watched his delegation with amusement rather than fear, and the way Secretary General Chun had negotiated like a man who held all the cards, and at the end of his report, he added a personal recommendation. High Counselor Vathran. He wrote, I have walked among the humans. I have seen their warriors and their children and their artists and their soldiers. They are not what we assume them to be. They are not a young species fumbling towards civilization like so many others. We have encountered. He paused, considering his words carefully. They are a patient species. They were content to remain on their world, building and growing, and waiting for the rest of the galaxy to notice them. The Yorithian invasion did not awaken their aggression. It revealed what was always there, coiled beneath the surface and ready to strike. He continued writing, I do not know why they evolved this way. I do not know what pressures shaped them into the warriors they have become. But I know this much. They are not prey. They have never been prey. They are predators who chose to be peaceful because they had no reason to be otherwise. He paused again. The Eurythians gave them a reason. I strongly recommend we do not do the same. His conclusion was simple. Accept their terms. All of them, immediately. Do not negotiate and do not delay, and do not give them any excuse to demonstrate their capabilities further. And then he added one final recommendation. Update the species registry. Where it currently reads threat assessment, strike whatever classification exists and replace it with a single word. He typed that word and stared at it for a long moment before transmitting the message. Avoid the council received his report within hours and convened an emergency session that same night. The debate was brief. High Counselor Vathran read Keleth's recommendation aloud and asked for objections. There were none. The vote was unanimous, and humanity's terms were accepted before the sun rose on the council homeworld, the dominion of Yarth. Received the council's directive the following day. They were ordered to send their new Supreme Commander to Earth to deliver a formal apology for the invasion. The Supreme Commander arrived 3 days later aboard an unarmed shuttle with no escort and no security detail. He knelt on the steps of the Pentagon in front of Secretary General Chun and a crowd of human dignitaries and delivered his apology in a voice that trembled with barely suppressed terror. Some observers said he wept during the ceremony. Others said he simply looked relieved that the humans had not decided to make an example of him. Either way, the apology was accepted, and the Eurythian shuttle departed. Earth orbit within the hour, never to return. Humanity took its seat on the Galactic Council. One cycle later, Ambassador Keleth was present for the ceremony, and he watched as Secretary General Chun addressed the assembled representatives of 17 elder species with the same calm confidence he had displayed throughout their negotiations. We are honored to join this council, Chun said, and we look forward to peaceful and prosperous relations with all member species. He smiled. But let us be clear about one thing. We did not ask to be part of your galaxy. We were happy on our world minding our own business. The Eurythians decided to change that, and they paid the price for their decision. He let the words hang in the air. We are not looking for conflict. We are not looking for conquest. We simply want to be left alone to live our lives and explore the stars at our own pace. His expression did not change, but his eyes swept across the assembled council members, and every single one of them felt the weight of his gaze. But if anyone else decides to start trouble with humanity, let me make one thing absolutely clear. He paused. We will finish it. The ceremony concluded, and the council adjourned, and the galaxy began adjusting to the new reality of a species that should not have been dangerous, but somehow was. And somewhere on Earth, in a small bar on the outskirts of Sydney, 12 men in civilian clothes raised their glasses in a quiet toast to another job well done. One of them said, "Hear, hear." The others replied. They drank in comfortable silence for a moment before one of them spoke again. "Think we will get another deployment soon?" "Doubt it." Another replied, "Word is the whole galaxy is scared to come anywhere near us now." "Shame. I was just getting warmed up." They laughed and ordered another round, and the bartender, who had no idea who his customers were or what they had done, smiled and poured their drinks. Outside the bar, the stars shone cold and distant, and somewhere among them 17 civilizations were quietly updating their strategic assessments and military doctrines. Every single one of those updates included the same basic principle. Do not under any circumstances provoke the humans, and, if you absolutely must provoke the humans, make sure your will is in order first. The galaxy had learned its lesson. Humanity had sent a message with the bodies of 40,000 Eurythian soldiers, and the council had finally received it.